Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore our relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, A.C. Stauble
and Isaac Hill. We've got Mychal A. Bryan back on the show talking about his new book on Horary Astrology. And this is a fascinating conversation. If you're into astrology, if you're into divination, you're going to love it. Mychal will be speaking at our Plant Cunning Conference, July 26th through 28th, held at our small farm in central New York. If you haven't gotten tickets, get tickets now. It's going to be an amazing time. We've got Mychal Bryan, we've got Pam Montgomery, we've got Rebecca Beyer, Lisa Fazio, so many super duper speakers. So get your tickets now and we'll see you there. Also, we appreciate 5-star reviews on Apple, on iTunes, that kind of stuff. We appreciate comments, likes, and shares on YouTube, and comments and likes and shares on Instagram, where we post our reels. We're also on TikTok and Facebook as well. So we really appreciate comments, likes, loves, really. Those love reacts are great. And shares. It helps spread the podcast around. And thank you for being a listener of this show. We really appreciate you. Okay, let's get to it. Welcome to another episode of the Plant Cunning Podcast, and we have Mychal A. Bryan returning. Mychal is an astrologer, author, educator, yogi. He's doing a lot of amazing things. The Oraculous School is his project, his school, and we're really excited because Mychal has just put a new book out on Horary Astrology. And he's going to be speaking at our conference in July 26th through 28th. So how are you doing today, Mychal?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show again. It's great to see you.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we're really excited to meet you in person later on in July. And you're going to be doing a really interesting class on medical astrology and female anatomy. And could you maybe give us a little preview of like what's going on with that? Like what are you going to be talking about?
Yeah, so within my yoga practice, I studied with one of the two top Iyengar yoga teachers in the world, basically, Dr. Lois Steinberg, and she's based in Champaign-Urbana, which is in Illinois, like 2 hours outside of Chicago. And within Iyengar yoga, we have a heavy emphasis on what is called medical yoga. And in the West, we can't really call it medical yoga for legal reasons, but in the East, it's completely known in India as medical yoga. And Mr. Iyengar, and particularly his daughter, Geeta Iyengar, spent a lot of time formulating just various protocol that we should follow within our yoga classes for women who were experiencing various female reproductive health issues, and that's across the entire spectrum. So polycystic ovarian syndrome, heavy bleeding during menstruation, menorrhagia, dysmenorrhea, endometriosis, all of these things. The Iyengars created a protocol within Iyengar yoga for how to assist women going through these challenging health conditions. And so in my yoga life, I was inundated by women who had various female reproductive health issues. When I went back home to the Bahamas and I opened up my Iyengar yoga clinic there, that was one of the core things that I worked with women on, essentially. So it was a very natural progression from specifically focusing on Iyengar yoga for female reproductive health to focusing on medical astrology for female reproductive health, because I already had this vast number of clients from my medical yoga practice. And that quickly translated to the clients who became my medical astrology clients. And so it's been a topic that I guess has always been very important for me. And I've worked with women throughout all stages of pregnancy, the transition from menstruation to menopause and everything in between. And so it's very deeply ingrained for that to be a central interest and a primary focus within my own practice. I also think that within astrology in general, and also yoga, but also particularly within astrology, the vast majority of my clients have been women. And I think that that's probably true for everybody, but specifically speaking for myself, the vast majority of my clients have been women. So it's always a topic. It always comes up within a reading. Issues surrounding children, issues surrounding when should I get pregnant? How will I get pregnant? Will I need to do it naturally or will I need to do it via IVF?
Mm.
So I mean, it's inadvertently become a central theme within everything that I do. I spoke at Norwalk last year, and the entire conference for that was about the female reproductive system, and my two talks was on that topic because while everything is important in terms of health and well-being, I think that just came to me and I went to it, and it's something I feel very satisfied in, and I have a whole lot to say about it, and so I can't wait to share it at the conference.
Yeah, that's really exciting because it's a very important issue and for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I've been finding that myself, just like really needing to level up the understanding and skills because it is such a prevalent thing, like women's health issues.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious, like what that yoga practice looks like. Like, if is it an individualized yoga practice for each client, or do you do group classes with
Mhm.
yoga? Like, are you working on the muscles like around like where the uterus connects to the like the connective tissue connects to the different areas and things like that?
Mhm.
Okay.
It's so specific. So, for example, we've oftentimes found that women who have a prolapsed uterus oftentimes also tend to have, and this is, I don't want to say this from a medical perspective because I'm not a medical doctor, but within the context of the work that we do,
Mhm.
when a woman has a prolapsed uterus, the first thing that we want to work on is her feet. And the reason for that is because very often when a woman has a prolapsed uterus, there's also a prolapse of the arches of her feet. So she's very flat footed. And so when that, according to the Iyengars, when the internal organic body drops, it also causes the inner thigh to drop. And which is why very often we find women with prolapsed uteruses also having knocked knees, where their knees are falling in together and then their arches are falling in. So, from a structural perspective, one of the things that we want to do is we want to lift the arches of the feet and teach her how to maintain a sense of that arch integrity, because that arch integrity ends up becoming integrity between the knees, which ends up becoming integrity of the inner groins, which ends up becoming integrity of the pelvic floor, which ends up lifting the entire organic body. So
Mhm.
that's just one example of some of the work that we do. And there are many ways. There's a plethora of things we can do just in terms of that one thing. But for example, heavy bleeding during menstruation is something, and that's called menorrhagia. When a woman is presenting with menorrhagia and she is either menstruating for a period of time that's too long or the flow is too heavy, there's a particular protocol within Iyengar yoga to address that versus scanty flow during menstruation, which is a completely separate
Uh-huh.
protocol in terms of increasing the menstrual flow versus decreasing the menstrual flow. I've had women come who were new mothers and they weren't producing enough breast milk.
Mhm.
And so within Iyengar Yoga, we have a protocol for that as well. And I think a big part of this is Mr. Iyengar's daughter, Geeta Iyengar, wrote a book called Iyengar Yoga, no, called Yoga, A Gem for Women. And in that book, she really outlines a lot of the several stages of a woman's life. And even outside of that book, her main intention was really using Iyengar yoga as a mean to support women's health. And my teacher, Lois Steinberg, as a result of some of her own reproductive health issues, she had the whole gamut. She had endometriosis, she had fibroids, she had all of these things. So I think in Iyengar yoga, we oftentimes get attracted to the things that have specifically helped us heal. For
Mhm.
example, I came into Iyengar yoga as a professional dancer, my knees were shot. And so I know from an Iyengar perspective how to do everything to fix the knees because that
Yeah.
was why I came into it. And so I think that there are so many ways to use Iyengar yoga to heal the body that you just kind of fall in where you fall in, and then you set your, you build your shop there. And for me, it's been yoga, Iyengar yoga for the structural body. So for the knees, the lower back, the neck, and the shoulders, but also Iyengar yoga for female reproductive health.
Hmm.
Very cool. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's pretty amazing. I just love how you've got the physical body work like through your work with yoga, and I didn't know you were a dancer actually. That's really cool. And then your like spiritual and like mental work with the astrology that goes with it. It's like really cool when practitioners can come at it from different angles.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, That's
I
cool.
mean, well, one more thing I'll add to this is
Yeah.
that within traditional astrology, when we begin giving a reading, we start from the first house, essentially. That's kind of our starting point, because the first house is your soul, it's your psyche, but it's also the vehicle of your physical body. So when we read a lot of ancient astrology texts or even texts from 400 years ago, there was never this idea of giving a reading without talking about the physical constitution of the person. And I think within the 21st
Yeah.
century, because we live in a period where everybody wants to get certified in a piece of something. Now we have this
Yeah.
certification culture in the world at large, and that's become a part of astrology culture. So now you can get certified in a piece of astrology. You can get certified as a medical astrologer versus a psychological astrologer versus a financial astrologer versus
Sure.
an ancestral astrologer, when in fact 400 years ago it was just one astrologer who did it all.
You had
And
to know
so
it all.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think that the physical body and our existence in the physical body is very central to just all astrology, because that is the most concrete reality we face in our lives. And
Yeah.
that's why I want to talk about this topic at the conference,
Mhm.
because I mean, and while it's not something very personal to me specifically, it's still something that I've worked with so much. And I
Yeah.
can't wait to share that research with everybody at the conference.
Yeah. So excited about that.
Definitely.
Can't wait.
I'm excited to sit in
Hmm.
and see what your findings are.
Yeah.
Sure.
Awesome.
And as I'm studying from the Jyotish perspective lately, everything is so integrated. The medical, it's all part of the same thing. And the the horary, or what they call it, prashna,
Awesome.
is integrated into the whole thing too. Like my teacher will always look at the time that the person sent the email and see like what they're thinking about when they're emailing him,
Hmm.
and then and in regards to like reproductive issues, we're studying birth circumstances right now, and the prashna for when somebody who's trying to get pregnant emails you, you can see all about what's going on in their
Very
reproductive
cool.
Hmm.
cycle and with the baby and everything, just from that horary. But a lot of people like think the horary is just like one thing that you do and like build their whole practice around just horary, but I think it's supposed to be integrated.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I'm really excited to talk with you about your new book on horary. So why this book? Why this is your second book? Why this one now?
It is. So this is the book for, oh, I don't, there's a lot of light, but this is the book. It's called Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, a concrete guide to astral divination. And this is the first one, Mastering Traditional Astrology, a depth of beginning in the celestial art. And I'm sorry, my demon camera is moving every time I'm like doing things. But anyway.
And your books are glowing.
Exactly. And so, these two books go together. So I teach a 2-year program at my school, the Oracular School of Astrology, and the first semester of that is 14 weeks long. And these two books represent the first 14 weeks of what I teach my students. And so they always were meant to go together. And actually, I had written the horary book before I wrote the Mastering Traditional Astrology. But in terms of the sequencing of things, the Mastering Traditional Astrology had to come before the horary, because this book, MTA, gives people all of the foundations of everything you could want to know from a traditional Western tropical astrology perspective, whereas this book tells you what to do with it. Horary astrology and the natal promise tells you what to do with it now that you have all of this foundation. And so the second book was really important because, one, it's the companion of the first book, but I also believe that horary astrology is a very important teaching tool in terms of traditional Western astrology. And I love what you said about it being integrated into natal astrology, which is why the book is called Horary Astrology and the Natal Promise, because when we look back at traditional horary astrologers, once again, 400 years ago, 500 years ago, there was always this thought that there is no astrology based on the person if that astrology doesn't also involve their natal chart. It's like you can't talk about what's going on in somebody's love life if you aren't also referencing their birth chart, because it's kind of stupid. Your entire life from an astrological perspective is rooted in your natal chart and in your destiny. And the only chart that houses your destiny is your birth chart. So it doesn't matter if you have a transitory question, is this person my soulmate? Is this person the one? Should I take this job? All of those transitory questions are still rooted in the realities of your natal promise. And so that's what this book is about. It's about teaching people Horary Astrology, one, but also teaching Horary Astrology in a more comprehensive way, because in the West, once again, we tend to teach things in a very compartmentalized way. So today, you can go and become a certified Horary astrologer and then hang your shingle and say, I'm a Horary astrologer, which for me has always felt it's felt a bit impoverished. And I don't personally, give student certificates just for studying Horary astrology, because for me, Horary astrology isn't really a complete practice by itself. Horary astrology is the gateway to having a deeper natal astrology conversation with somebody, but I don't really treat Horary like its own standalone thing, because there's a lot more that you need to work with a person if you're going to be working with them in any capacity. And Horary astrology is just one branch of that. So in this book, I talk about all of it. I talk about Horary as people know it today, but then I also talk about ways how to integrate Horary astrology into a natal consultation, how to use consultation charts as well, which is a nebulous part of Horary astrology. A lot of people know about consultation charts, but not many people know how to integrate it into their practice. I talk about astrological dream interpretation, which is something huge in my life because I have a huge dream work practice and I've taught people how to do that. So their stories populate the chapter on astrological dream work. There's a chapter on geomancy, astrological, like all of these things that haven't been written about and that haven't been combined in an astrology book for like 500 years. I resurrected them and I put them in this book. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, nice. And I do understand how like William Lilly doing horrors in a pub for a bunch of people who don't have their birth times.
Sure, yeah.
It's totally different when you don't have your birth time and
Mhm.
you just have to give an answer for somebody. But these days, when we have a birth time, it just makes it you got to use it.
And I mean that was even the standard then as well. I think William Lilly was interesting as a person, but he wasn't the only astrological voice coming out of the 17th century. And other people who were writing as his contemporaries in their books, they said, hey, if the Horary chart is great, but it will always be secondary to the birth chart. And if you have somebody's birth chart, a Horary chart is a tiny confirmation of what the birth chart already says. So that's kind of my approach as well. And I still teach people the run-of-the-mill Horary astrology that you could learn anywhere else, because I think that people are accustomed to that. But I also wanted this book to be a platform of people learning how to do so much more and how to use Horary astrology as a launching pad for a larger client-based practice.
I'm super interested in the astro dream element too, but first, like, what is horary? Just to get on the same page with listeners who aren't familiar, can you define?
Yeah, Horary astrology is essentially the divinational branch of astrology. And that's kind of a funky thing to say because there's a lot of debate as to whether or not astrology is a system of divination in general. But what that means is that Horary astrology is a means of answering a person's question based on casting a chart for the exact moment that that person asks the question. So in the same way as your birth chart is your chart for life, it's the chart that describes the destiny of the unfolding of your life. The Horary chart essentially describes the destiny of the unfolding of that question. So if you ask, should I go to Cape Cod this weekend? And you cast a Horary chart, the Horary chart is meant to hold not only the question that you're asking, but also the outcome of that question, should you choose to pursue that course of action. So it's essentially the same as being a tarot reader or a tea leaf reader or a dream interpreter. You have this language. And as far as astrology is concerned, the language is the language of the stars and the planets and the signs and the houses. But you have this language and you're speaking to the divine in this language and saying, hey, I have this question. What's your answer? And you get that answer in terms of the chart. And when you get that answer, you're meant to interpret that to give you guidance based on what you should do in relationship to the question that you asked.
Okay, cool. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's like very much like tarot reading or something like that. I mean, it's very similar to geomancy. That maybe we should get into that. Like, what is geomancy, and how is it How is it the cousin or the sister of astrology?
Geomancy, and this is a direct quote from the 12th century. What I'm about to say, geomancy is astrology for dumb people. That's what that's what every geomancer in the 13th and the 12th century said. Geomancy is astrology for people who don't have the time to know the mathematics necessary to cast a chart. They don't have the head space to know how to calculate the positions of the planets. They don't have the inclination or the desire to know how to cast the houses or anything. Geomancy is astrology for dumb people. And and when I saw that, I can't remember who I saw who said that, but I laughed, but it's the truth. Because everything about geomancy is the exact same thing as horary astrology, but it's 10,000 times easier than astrology, especially if you were casting a chart by hand. It is a million times easier, but it is exactly the same thing. So in geomancy, basically, you have these figures, these 16 figures, and I wonder if I could even show in the book, and then when I read that, and once again I have to find exactly who said that, but when I read that, it was like, wow, this is how I felt for a long time practicing geomancy, but I never knew that this was a popular opinion, that geomancy is astrology for dumb people. But anyway, so in geomancy there are these 16 figures called the geomantic figures, and I don't think it's going to show because of the glare, but there are these 16 geomantic figures. Oy vey, and now my camera is doing.
It's trying to find your face again.
Yeah, Cursor, Acquisito,
yeah, exactly.
a Major,
Exactly. Yeah. So those are the 16 geomantic figures. They all have a correspondence with a planet. And basically, what you're meant to do is, let me go to the previous page, or well, the page after. What you're meant to do is ask your question, hold your question in your head and heart, and then make 16 rows of dots, basically, with a pen or a quill or whatever you use. Make 16 rows of random dots as you ask that question and hold that question. And so this is probably what that might look like. So this is 16 rows of random dots. It's a very meditative practice, just doing that. And then after that, you go through a process of dividing those dots over and over again until from that 16 rows of dots, you ultimately create these geomantic figures. And this is what the geomantic figures look like when you put them into the shape of a chart. So I'm kind of like trying to speak about it quickly because I know we don't really have time to really go deeply into it. But anyway, you make these, you keep on going through this process of division until you make these geomantic figures, and you put them into the same shape as an astrological chart. And then you answer the question just like you would a horary astrology question. The first house is going to represent the person asking the question. And then if you're asking about love, the seventh house is going to represent your love story. If you're asking about career, the 10th house is going to represent your career. It is exactly the same as horary astrology. You just interpret the figures that are in the houses. And so if, for example, I have a Martian figure in the first house and I'm saying, should I pursue this career path? That Martian figure in my first house might say, hey, you're really fired up about this. You're really fiery about this, and you're probably not thinking about this clearly because you're trying to rush forward because you have some larger angst within your life, and as a result of that, you feel this urgency to pursue this career path right now, but you're probably not thinking about it clearly. And then if I have a Martian figure also in the 10th house, which is the house of career, that's going to say, look, you're Martian and this career is Martian. You're going to rush into this career. You're going to find yourself surrounded by people who are also combative, people who are also like Mars, the god of war. It's probably not going to be a pleasant working environment because you rushed into it without reading the fine print. So I mean, it's astrology. It's astrology, but it's astrology for dummies.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, and it's easy these days to just type something into a computer program and have a chart appear automatically. But back in the day, it took a lot more work. you had to know all the math. You had to have the everything. It was maybe even more like astrology for normal people, because you had to be really smart to be able to do astrology.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. I mean, you know what? I'm not a mathematical genius by any stretch of the imagination, so I'm fine with the astrology for dummies thing. That completely feels very like it makes me happy because astrology is a very elitist subject, and it always has been, because astrology assumes that you know a lot of things that the normal person doesn't really know. And so that's why astrology is something everybody likes to talk about, but it isn't something that many people do very, very well in terms of the larger, non-informed astrological consumer. Like I was with somebody recently and we were talking about astrology, and I said, "Hey, you know, I have a workshop coming up this evening. What's it about?" I said, "It's about astrology." And he said, "Oh, so you're going to be talking about the zodiac." Because that's what people think. You know, you
Yeah.
tell people
Right.
you're going to teach an astrology workshop and they think you're going to talk about what it means to be a Taurus, what it means to be an Aries. And I was like, no, it's actually astrocartography. I'm going to be talking about finding where you belong in the world based on where your planets intersect a map of the world. And that completely went over his head because the non-informed astrological consumer thinks that all astrology is the signs of the zodiac. So, I mean, basically, I'm saying all that to say that with geomancy, it's great because, well, actually, before that, my main point was that astrology has always been something that's pushed people out. You know, that's why a lot of people love tarot, because tarot is easy. Tarot is, I look at these cards, I can see myself in the story of these cards. Tarot is infinitely easier for a person with no knowledge at all to latch on to and say, hey, I get this. But
Yeah.
astrology isn't, you know? So I love systems of divination that allow people to feel like they could actually practice it, and geomancy is one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, astrology really is a whole language
Yeah.
that you have to, it's like learning a language,
Mhm.
maybe even more difficult. But so what kind of questions can you answer with horary or geomancy, and what are the most often the questions you get most often?
Should I leave my husband? That is the
Probably.
that is the question.
If you're asking, yeah.
That is the question that comes up most frequently. You
Interesting.
know, I think it's interesting, and I think that astrology will always reflect the time period it's in. And today, in a world where more women are consumers of astrology than, and I don't even know if it's true that than men, you know, I'm not sure that the than men is true, but I think that in terms of people who book astrology consultations, the same thing that happens in therapy, I think, is the same thing that happens in astrology. Men in general are less inclined, men in the West, and maybe men in the East. I don't know. But the point is, men in general are less inclined to reach out for help if they genuinely need help. Whereas I think women, and probably that's true for women as well, but I think more women tend to realize that something's wrong. They need to reach out to somebody and
Yeah.
get some counsel or advice or something.
Mhm.
So, yeah, one of the biggest questions, the big questions that people always ask about are the questions that pertain to the angular houses. So the first house is the house of myself, my health, and my body. So the questions from the first house will be, am I sick? Is this medication going to be the right thing for me? Should I go back to this doctor for this kidney consultation? I have Lyme disease. Should I choose to take an antibiotic route, or should I choose to go to this Lyme disease retreat center that specifically helps people with Lyme disease? My child is an alcoholic. How can I help him out? How can I really understand what my child is going through? So things like that. First house stuff. Second house questions are also very prevalent. Will I be rich? Or should I invest my money in this business venture? Is this thing going to work out for me financially? Is this project going to give me a good return on my investment? Fourth house questions. Should I move? Should I relocate? Where should I relocate? When should I relocate? Why does this keep happening to my house? I've moved to 10 different houses and they all have mold. Why does mold seem to be following me everywhere I go? Seventh house question. Should we get married? When should we get married? Is this person the one? Is this person my soulmate? This relationship feels awful, but should I keep investing in it? And
Mm.
and finally, 10th house questions. what am I meant to be doing professionally? Should I leave my job? Should I start this new business venture? Is my business going to be successful? Will I be okay after retirement, or will I need to pursue another part-time form of income and job? So those questions that pertain to the first house, second house, fourth house, seventh house, and 10th house, those questions are the most prominent. And then here and there, people might ask questions, will I get pregnant, or is my brother going to be okay, or questions that pertain to the other houses. But in general, people tend to come to astrology for those 5 topics: self, money, real estate, marriage, and career.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I found too. It's mostly those. It's a lot of job stuff, relationship stuff, moving.
And is it a lot of women you see too?
Well, yes, that also.
That is interesting. And I think you're right about the reason why you see more women is like we have in our culture, just it's more acceptable for women to seek help, to have support. Like we call our friends when we're stressed out, and men will just sort of try to grin and bear it, And that's kind of the culture of masculinity.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this recently last night. I'm gay, and I was speaking to somebody last night about a gay man's experience about coming out into the world versus a woman's experience of coming out as a lesbian. And I think I'm sure that for lesbians, it's a challenging thing as well in some way, but I think that culturally, we're just accustomed to seeing women holding hands. And we're just accustomed to seeing women hug each other and embrace each other. And we're just accustomed to seeing a certain level of physical intimacy amongst women that just isn't common amongst men. So I think it's easier, and this is me as a gay man saying a lesbian's experience is easier, but I think it's a little bit easier for women to really step into that part of themselves in their coming out experience than I think it is for men. And I think that just follows through in terms of how men take care of themselves, how men seek help. Men tend to not offload their stuff with each other. We tend to not have that same level of intimacy that I think women just naturally share in life in general. And so, yeah, men die constipated and full of things that they should have shared with other people that our society just doesn't give them a means of really letting go of.
Yeah.
I hear that.
I think also in Western culture, men are supposed to be rational. And astrology is irrational because it doesn't fit the dominant paradigm. So a lot of men who haven't really delved deeply into it think that it's irrational because all they know is like the zodiac signs
stuff,
or like your sun signs. I think that might play into it a little bit too.
Yeah, I think that, and also just like help, like I think that there's this archetype of the man who is the hero and the long sufferer who just doesn't ask for help,
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I think the problem is us. The problem is society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that can change and that men can seek the help that they need and that they can support each other in the ways that women kind of already do more seemingly naturally. But yeah, I think I see that future of men like really coming together and supporting each other. And I'm putting that intention out into the world for the men.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of help and of those questions that are asked, I can see a lot of those questions can be more easily. I mean, like looking at the natal chart, you can see what your relationship right now is like, what the next relationship might be like. You can see transits, going to the 7th house. You can see timing techniques, like with what planets in the 10th house or what the 10th house lord is getting triggered. So, but the horary, it gives us a very clear sort of like pinpoints what's going on at the moment. So how do you integrate those two, the horary and the natal charts?
I think that's a great question. I think that when somebody comes for any question that you have, and I think that this is just built into just astrology philosophy, any question that you have, it arises from the depths of your soul, basically, and it arises from the depths of your own process. So, for example, if you say that I just met this person and I feel deeply attracted to this person. Is this person my soulmate? That question, it might seem fickle, especially if you just asked that same question the week before about somebody else. But the point is that these questions that we have about life, no matter how great or how small they are, they all arise from deep within ourselves as an expression of need. And everything that we need is built into our natal charts. Everything that we need and that we desire in life is built into our natal promise.
Beautiful.
So for me, when I start a reading, I always reference your natal chart. You're asking about this relationship, but what does your birth chart say in general about your relationship to relationships? Are you attracted to this type of person because this person fits a particular mold? Has that mold been helpful to you in the past? Does this mold seem as if it's going to be helpful for you right now? Do you have that person's birth chart as well? Can we take a look at both of your birth charts juxtaposed against each other just to see how you're going to play into each other's lives? What's that person's destiny in this lifetime as far as love going to be? Are you fitting into this person's love destiny? And so for me, the horary process is a far more comprehensive process than coming in and me just saying yes or no. And I think that a lot of times we do get away with saying just yes or no in horary astrology. And ultimately, the end result of all of that work should still be to say definitively yes or definitively no. But I think that there's something about that process in the middle, about seeing who you are truly through the lens of your own chart, who that person is through the lens of that person's chart, who the two of you are together through the lens of your charts combined, how this horary chart is reflective of both of your stories. I think that there's this much deeper level of unfolding that happens when you have a natal based approach to horary astrology than if I just pulled up the chart and said, yes, marry this person, no, don't marry this person.
Makes sense. Cool. Yeah, you can just glean so much more knowledge from that natal chart than the question has its own chart, but the natal chart just gives you way more information. That makes sense.
Yeah, and and there is just answering it based on the horary chart. There is that, and I think the majority of this book, like probably 70% of the book, is showing how to just answer the question based on the horary chart, because I think that's what most people are accustomed to. But that last 30% of the book, I think, is really profound because it says, hey, like, yeah, we could do that 70%, but this last 30% is so valuable and is so meaningful, and we don't really see a lot of it. So let's try to lean into this as a new approach to our overarching horary practice. Now that we already know how to do basic horary, let's explore horary beyond the basics.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. And I've been doing prashnas for my clients, it's been really amazing to see. And they're not asking me for a horary, but I'm looking at the horary for when they contact me. And like the ascendant lord will be in the 10th house and they'll be asking about their work and about what their career, or the ascendant will be in the 7th house and they're asking about their relationship. And it's really
so crazy.
So how does it work?
Yeah, how does that work?
Why do you
why how?
I mean, I don't know. I think that the reality is that time isn't just this thing that's moving that has no qualitative difference. And I think that astrology acknowledges that every moment of time is qualitatively different from the other. And when we ask a question, and this is also kind of beyond my pay grade because I really don't know, but I think that
sure.
but
It's
but
fine.
I think that fundamentally what happens when we ask a question, there are ancient authors who've spoken about this, and they say that you can only ask a question if the heavens move in such a way that causes that question to arise within you. So we tend to think that we just ask a question based on our own free will, that, oh my God, I have this question. But the ancients had this understanding that the only time a question arises within us is when the only time. And I think we also have to define what we mean by a question, because a question isn't just you saying now, hey, I want to ask a question because we're here talking, ha ha ha, should I open this business? No, that's not what the ancients define as a question. A question is something of power and force, and that holds a great level of magic within it, because a sincerely held burning question, when it's asked, it burns a hole through the cosmos. That was the ancient idea of the power of a question. You just flippantly being at the bar saying, oh, who's going to win the game? That for the ancients wasn't a question. That was a curiosity.
Sure.
But a question, when you genuinely find yourself without any more resources, and there's nothing within you other than the emptiness that you feel and the question that arises out of that emptiness and out of that angst, that question carries a weight, according to the ancients, that has the ability to stop the hands of time. And when time stops long enough for that question to be heard by the gods and for that question to be answered by the gods. And that is why a question, a truly held burning question, is so important, because if your question burns within you, it also burns within the heirs of the gods. And because the gods, time, nature, whatever you want to call it, cannot stand there being a vacuum within itself, as soon as your question tears a hole through the universe responds by filling that hole with an answer. And so that's the romantic version of me saying, I don't know what's going on. But ultimately, I don't know what's going on, but that's what I think is going on.
I love that, Mychal. That is such a cool answer.
I think also it's like a question, a deep, real deep question is something that wells up, and it's something that happens to you.
Sure.
You know? And that may be caused by what's going on in the heavens. So there's a correspondence. But yeah, we do like to think that our thoughts are our own in this culture, and to a certain degree, they are. But a lot less than we like to think.
I think the entire astrological premise is that we're connected to nature and nature is connected to us. And as humans, we tend to think that we're somehow separate from that, and that the trees respond to nature, and that the animals respond to nature, and that the elements respond to nature, but somehow we have some autonomy that allows us not to be moved in the same way as everything else around us is moved. But I mean, astrologically speaking, especially in some of the examples I show in the book, it's uncanny the way in which the horary question, the chart of the horary question, carries the essence of your natal chart, but it also carries the essence of your partner's natal chart, but it also carries the essence of your soul return chart for this year, which is the predictive chart for the year. And it also carries the essence of your lunar return chart for this month, which is the predictive chart for this month. It carries the essence of so many charts. And when you bring these charts together, they all fit together like a puzzle. And it's uncanny the way in which this one random moment of me asking this question today fits into all of these other charts that on the surface seem to have no relationship to today, but they all fit together like a clockwork orange. It's fascinating how that works, and I don't have the answer of why it works, other than we've been here before, and other than everything that we're asking and everything that we're saying, it's all been played out before, and it's all a part of a larger story and a larger tapestry, and we're just filling in the roles and thinking that we're doing so because of our free will, but we're actually just asking the questions that we were always going to ask in this lifetime to begin with.
That's really interesting too. So trippy.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty wild. It's like a mushroom conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I love it.
So there's a lot of like technical things I'm kind of interested in too, like how, like, so I studied horary with Chris Warnock, and so studied in that tradition, William Lilly based tradition, and it's all about like either the moon or the ascendant connecting with Lord of whatever house you're inquiring about. And then as I'm studying the Jyotish, there's kind of different rules for things. One of the rules is that if the ascendant of the horary, the prashna, is either the same ascendant, seventh, or a trine from the ascendant of the natal chart, then it's a valid question. If not, then there's like they didn't ask at the right time, or like something like that, or it wasn't a real deeply held question. Do you have anything like that for seeing what horaries are like really valid and important, and which ones are like not?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think that Jyotish, I love Jyotish and I studied Jyotish for years as well. And I really honor it as its own tradition because I think that Jyotish works, it's powerful, it's a wonderful form of astrology. And at the same time, the way how Western astrology developed is different, is substantially different. And so we do have these rules regarding how radical a question is within Western astrology. And I find that a lot of astrologers in the 17th century really held on to those rules a lot more than we do today. But the reality is, I think that there's always been this underlying understanding in Western astrology that any chart can be read. It doesn't matter if it fits the rules or not, any chart can be read. If a chart can be cast, a chart can be read. And so we have rules in Western astrology, like if there are late degrees rising, then the question is too late and the destiny of the question has already solidified. Therefore, it doesn't even make sense asking the question because the destiny is inevitable. Whereas if there are too early degrees rising within the chart, then the question hasn't grown enough legs yet, and the question is still in a state of flux, and the future about it can't be known. But we find those charts showing up historically, and we still find the astrologers reading them. So I think that who knows, maybe there's a deeper level of reverence within Indian culture regarding things, oh, the gods are saying no, then it's a no. Versus in the West, we've always had this level of curiosity that has gone even beyond where the gods say we shouldn't go. So even if we do get things in the horary chart that say no, don't read the chart, we still read the chart because there's this sense in Western astrology of I don't even know if it's a pragmatism or it's a more human based whatever, but there's this sense of Western astrology that if we can ask a question, the question should be able to be answered. So, to answer your question, yes, we do have things or these cautions within Western astrology that say, hey, if this is happening, if you have the Via Combusta rising anywhere between 15 degrees Libra to 15 degrees Scorpio, then the question is a challenging question. Or if you have the moon in Scorpio, then the person is probably lying about the thing they're asking about. Or if you have late degrees or early degrees rising, then it means this. Or if you have Saturn in the first house or Saturn in the seventh house, then it means like all of these things. But ultimately, we still find the astrologers reading the charts. So we have the rules, we just don't follow them.
Well, they give information. They give more information.
Yeah.
Like, if it's late degrees rising, this is something that's probably already set in motion. Like, you're not going to have as much, you're not going to be able to change it that much. If it's early degrees rising, maybe you have a lot more choice. This is what's probably going to happen, but other things could happen too. And still, like, like I'm thinking about a prashna that we just looked at in class where it was somebody asking about pregnancy, and she knew that it was the new moon, the Amavasya, so she didn't ask then, she waited. And then,
tricky.
right, because she knew it would be a bad, that's not a time to ask. So then when we looked at the prashna, the ascendant wasn't right, but in the D9 there was an Amavasya. So there's still information in there.
What's Amavasya?
That's the new moon. It's like a dark moon, the dark moon.
And I think that that's a very interesting point as well. And I speak about it in the book that when somebody tries to tamper, the whole premise of divination is that you're giving yourself over to the gods.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
So this idea that I'm not going to ask this question now because I know that it's a new moon and I'm going to wait until the new moon passes so that I can get a better answer, that's not true divination.
Yep.
If I knew that a person was coming to me with that as their intention, I wouldn't read their chart. I'll give them to somebody else because that's not true divination. True divination has no it even in tarot, for example, I think tarot is such a wonderful example of true divination because when you shuffle those cards, there's no part of you that decides which card comes on top, which card comes on the bottom, which card comes next to which other card. There's a sense of completely giving my will over. Thy will be done. And those words, thy will be done, is the entry point to true divination. So if you're coming in on a Monday at midday, because you know that this is the planetary hour of the moon, and you know that you're wanting to ask a question and you want for it to be lunar and you want the moon to bless it, then go someplace else, go talk to a therapist because that's not true divination. True divination isn't that. True divination is it drops within your heart You ask it as it drops without any consideration of when you ask it, where you ask it, who you ask it to, why you ask it. True divination is an organic, spontaneous thing. And a person meddling with their divinational outcome, like that person with the new moon situation, one, they don't understand divination. And two, we probably shouldn't be answering that question, basically. Me personally, within the house of what I do and the
Totally.
what I do. Yeah, and 400 years ago, they wouldn't answer that person's question either, because there are paragraphs and chapters after chapter written in people's horary astrology books about not answering questions for people like that.
Yeah, right. Or if like Rubius shows up in the first house in a
Burn the whole
geomancy.
chart. Yeah.
Oh.
Then you
And-
kind of know they're trying to tamper with it or
And is
something.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Is it like the time that the person asks the question, or is it the time that the astrologer understands the question being asked? Because sometimes you have to clarify.
Yeah, so within Western astrology, which is different in Jyotish, because I think, and I'm not, by no a stretch of the imagination today still practicing Jyotish, but within Jyotish, there's this idea that the time that the person submits the question to you, and also that person's location should be taken. Whereas within Western astrology, it is the time the astrologer understands the question, and the astrologer's location should be taken as where to cast the chart for.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, even within that, there's these vast differences between what we do in the West and what we do in the East, because whereas in the West, we would take the astrologer's location and the astrologer's understanding as being the moment of divination, in the East, you would take the other person's location. So if I'm based in Boston and that person emailing me is based in London, I will cast a chart for London, for that person's time, for that person's location, as opposed to me, which I think is great from a philosophical perspective, and I think it makes complete sense. But that just is in the shape of Western astrology. So anyway, in terms of establishing like what time within Western astrology is the time that I understand the question, and if I don't understand the question that somebody emails, I email them again and I say, hey, can you clarify this? And only when we've refined that question to the point of me understanding it do I then cast the chart.
Okay. Very cool. Gotcha. Oh, so can we talk about the astro dream interpretation a bit now?
Oneiromancy. Yes, we can.
Yes, I'm very excited. So how do you do that?
So oneiromancy is the oneiros. There are two different types of dreams. There's an ancient Greek dream interpreter called Artemidorus, and he wrote the only book that we have on dream interpretation from the ancient period. It's the only extant book on dream interpretation in the Western world that we have, and it's called Oneiromantica, or On the Interpretation of Dreams by Artemidorus. And he divides dreams into two categories. One are prophetic dreams, and then the other dreams are the dreams that just describe what's going on in your daily life, basically. And so those prophetic dreams are called oneiros dreams because oneiros means dream. And so dream interpretation is called oneiromancy. And in the ancient world, particularly within the medieval period, the three top forms of divination were dream interpretation, astrology, and geomancy. So this book covers dream interpretation, astrology, and geomancy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think around the time I got into astrology, I was also very deeply invested in astral projection as a concept. I had seen it on TV, I had seen it on Charms. One of the sisters on Charm Prue, she could astral project out of her body and be somewhere else or something.
Pretty
So
cool.
that was my only context for what that was. And then I came across a book on astral projection, and I was like, wow, I'm gonna like leave my body. And there was a lot of different techniques in the book for how to astral project. And I mean, some of them you had to meditate, and others of them you had to put yourself into a trance, and then others of them you had to like repeat a mantra to yourself, and then others of them you had to like rub flying ointment, like you had to make a flying ointment and then rub it on your third eye. And it just seemed very over the top. But there was one technique in this book that had to do with lucid dreaming. And it was a very straightforward technique. It was a very straightforward process. And all you had to do was do this on a daily basis. and it would cause you to be able to lucid dream. Lucid dreaming means you experience your dreams with the same level of depth and profundity as you experience your daily life, basically. They made a movie about it called Inception. Have either watched Inception? Yeah, so Inception was about lucid dreaming. And so I started doing that as a kid, and it worked. It worked tremendously well. I have dream journals that go all the way back to my childhood of recording these dreams. The challenge with lucid dreaming is that when you begin a lucid dreaming practice, your dreams becomes vivid, very, very vivid, and you have to write them down on a daily basis. If you don't write them down on a daily basis, then there's nothing there. Your brain is going to treat them as if they're just another part of your daily content, and they're not going to be memorable anymore unless you commit to writing them down. And that's the most difficult part of lucid dreaming, committing to writing your dreams down, because we're talking about you having a dream and you spend the first hour of your day writing down every detail within that dream. It's not a 5-minute practice. It might be an hour-long practice because the details become that rich. So anyway, the point is I started doing that. And when I found in astrology that there were a few traditional astrologers from the 13th century or from the 17th century who spoke about dream interpretation, I said, well, hey, has there been anyone at any point in time who's actively dreamed, who's intentionally dreamed and then cast a chart for that? And we don't really have a history of that within traditional astrology. William Lilly speaks about dream interpretation within his book, and there's one chart for it because it's not something that people come to their astrologer to talk about. So since I knew how to make people dream on demand, and I knew how to teach people how to do that, I said, hey, let me just teach my students this. I hosted a workshop on it called the Oracles of the Dreaming. And now I have a group of at least 63 astrologers who dream every single night, and they record those dreams and they record the charts of those dreams. And those charts of those astrologers are what I put in the book.
Okay. And so the chart is when they wake up, and what is okay. What's the chart?
Because if you wake up at 7 a.m. every single morning and you cast the chart for 7 a.m. every single morning, it's going to be the same chart for a month until the sun changes into the next sign. So what do I have them do? I have them wake up and record the dream to the best of their ability, and then go about their day. And when the thought pops up in their mind again to go back to their dream practice, I have them go back to their dream practice and go back to the dream that they've recorded, reread it, see if more insight comes to them or see if more memory comes to them about the dream, add that, and then cast the chart for that moment. Not the moment when they wake up, but for the moment when they remember to return to that practice within the course of the day. And when they do that, you end up having a chart that is distinct every time you cast it, because maybe you remember at 3:30 p.m. today, and maybe tomorrow you remember at 6:57, and maybe the next day you remember at 10:30 p.m. before you go to bed. So every day they have a unique dream chart to interpret. And so that's how I do it.
Yeah, and that does happen like throughout the day. Like it'll pop into your head and you'll be like, oh yeah, that happened last night. That was weird. Let's go read the dream journal. Cool. That's interesting.
So what have you been finding? What have you found? It's really interesting.
What I've found is that everything that Guido Bonatti said about planets in the house of the dream tends to be true. It's all true. So for example, having the south node in the house of the dream, there's a whole process of looking and determining where's the house of the dream. But having the south node in the house of the dream means that you're in a dark, smoky place and you hear howling in the night. That's true. People who have the south node in the house of the dream, their dreams tend to be of a more ominous nature, and there's darkness and there's smoke and there's fog and they can't see clearly. But I've also found interesting things about the modern planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in the house of the dream, and I put that into the book as well. So I mean, it's a fascinating thing, and I think a lot of people appreciate the fact that I don't just leave it where William Lilly would have left it, which is like, this is what happened in the dream. I take it the full gamut of interpreting the chart and looking to see what's going on in the person's life, why they're having the dream to begin with. And so it's a lot more comprehensive, what I've done in terms of the dream examples in this book, than truthfully has ever been done in any traditional astrology book that we have left over by our traditional authors.
Yeah, that's very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Wow.
It is. Oh, you have a dog.
We have a little dog. He's our sweet Percy. He's our little persimmon.
Wow.
Just like looked at me like, hold me.
Oh.
Hold me. Oh, he's such a good
precious.
guy.
It's amazing.
He's so cute. Yes, he is.
So Mychal, this has been a really amazing conversation. An hour has already flown by.
I know.
Mhm.
Really excited about your book. I think
Yeah.
it's a great addition to your series.
Mhm.
It looks amazing. Especially the dream interpretation stuff. That's really groundbreaking.
Yeah.
So I'm sure really excited about it, and congratulations.
Mhm.
And we're looking forward to seeing you in July. But what else have you got going up on?
Yeah, what are you excited about?
Yeah, where can people find your school? Where can people find your work? Get a reading?
Awesome. So I'm giving readings for the month of June. And so if anybody wants to work with me, you can check out my website at oraculasastrology.com. And that's where you can find out everything about my school and my book and my readings. I also host a free community chart reading every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And that's something that we live stream to YouTube. And so if you want to join in and get your chart read, then you can do that every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. That happens over on the Oraculos podcast on YouTube. And every Friday, today at 2 p.m., we also have an insight into the astrology or an update for the astrology of the week ahead. So there's a lot of things that we're doing. I'm doing more things as live streams because I got very overwhelmed by having to edit things afterwards and listen to things afterwards, which I'm sure you know about as well.
Yeah.
100%.
And so yeah, now everything I do is completely live stream, which is also chaotic in its own sense because
Sure.
when it's live stream and then if you have to cough, like you can't edit that out, but whatever. It's a free community offering, and so that's what we do. So Wednesdays and Fridays at 2 p.m. You can check us out on YouTube at the Oraculos podcast, and that's something that's where people can find us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mychal. And this has been so fun. And I can't wait to meet you in person.
Awesome. I look forward to seeing you all in 40 days.
Yes. Cheers.
Awesome. Have a good one.
You too.